Actually, told us 2 days ago, and we didn't know. No. So you do your readings on time? Confidential readings? Yeah. Yes, that's why, because he told us a couple days ago, and that's how they found out, and no one knew. We were like, I wanted to go to check the application. 2018, right?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to get started. If you can all please take your seats. My name is Christina Alney, and I am the Director of Government Relations of the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation. On behalf of our organization and the Uyghur Human Rights Project, I would like to thank you all for being here for this very timely briefing. The Ordeal of a Uyghur County, Case Records of Mass Detention. The Chinese Communist Party's campaign of cultural genocide has swept millions into detention, separated families, attacked the cornerstones of Uyghur faith and identity, and led to the establishment of a high-tech Orwellian police state. The China cables leave absolutely no room for doubt about what the Chinese Communist Party is doing in the Uyghur region and what it intends to do to them in future. I would now like to turn it over to Omer Kanat, Executive Director of the Uyghur Human Rights Project, who will speak in more depth about the groundbreaking analysis that UHRP has just released today. Thank you, Omer.
Thank you, Christina. We are very pleased to be co-sponsoring this event with the victims of communism, an important champion of human rights, and a great friend to the Uyghur people. The document that we are talking about today is at least the fourth set of leaked government documents related to Uyghur crisis. We at the UHRP wish to pay tribute to the individuals who took great risks in sending these documents to the outside world. They knew they would face terrible punishment if caught, but they took the risk anyway. We honor their sense of responsibility to history and their help in exposing and stopping these human rights crimes. And Uyghurs in exile also face a terrible choice. If they pass along documents they receive or speak out and explain what they know, they fear their families will face reprisals. UHRP has documented the ongoing threats against the Uyghur American family in East Turkestan in our recent report, repression across borders. But these threats have not silenced them. One example is Asya Abdullahat, a Uyghur woman in Netherlands who has helped journalists access and understand leaked government documents. As she has said, if we keep silent to try to protect our families, then who will act to end this nightmare? And today we will also hear from another Uyghur in exile, Abdulwali Ayub, whose family has also suffered tremendously. This morning, UHRP released its report on the Karakash document called Ideological Transformation, Case Records from Karakash Khotan. The Karakash document provides clear confirmation of the truthfulness of eyewitness and survivor testimony. It also provides clear confirmation of other Orwellian police state operations in East Turkestan. That includes the Integrated Joint Operations Platform, Data Collection Program, cadres living in Uyghur homes through the Becoming Family Program, forced labor, and punishment of two-faced Uyghurs. All these policies and operations are openly referenced in the case records. Governments and the UN must act now to end this nightmare. UHRP is also urgently calling for international intervention because of a new threat, the threat of coronavirus spreading in the detention camps and forced labor facilities. Xinjiang University has delayed the start of the spring semester until further notice to prevent infections, but the government has not said a single word about closing the camps to prevent deadly epidemic. We know that prisoners are in very poor health, face overcrowded conditions, and rarely have water. Last week, UHRP sent letters to U.S. Secretary of Health and Human Services, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and the World Health Organization. We are calling for immediate international intervention to save lives. Since then, equally horrifying news is coming out of East Turkestan regarding inhumane quarantine policies. Several sources report that whole neighborhoods were suddenly blocked off with no warning. People did not have time to stock up on food. This happened about 10 days ago, and new messages are sounding the alarm that people have no food left. We fear extreme consequences if nothing is done. UHRP is making an emergency appeal for food supplies to be delivered to the people who did not have time to stock up for the quarantine. Finally, I want to urge the US Congress pass the Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act. Earlier versions of this bill passed unanimously by Senate in September and by the House in December 2019. It's time to pass the bill into law. There is no time to be lost. Thank you. Now I will turn the program over to UHRP's Director of Global Advocacy, Larissa Greva.
Thank you, Omer. Welcome to again to all our guests and to all those who are watching on the live streaming of our event. Thank you. We will go ahead with our panelists presenting their research and analysis. Each panelist will speak 10 to 15 minutes, a little longer if they need the time, and then we will have time for comments and questions at the end. We will begin with Adrian Zetz. As you know, he is a senior fellow in China Studies at the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, and he supervises PhD students at the European School of Culture and Theology at Grüntal in Germany. His research focuses on China's ethnic policy in both Tibet and the Uyghur region. He's authored several monographs and, as you know, many influential research articles on the Uyghur crisis, many of which are published in the Journal of Political Risk. Adrian, will you lead us off?
Thank you. My pleasure to be here. I have brought a PowerPoint, which will probably come up shortly. Yesterday, a leaked document has been published by a whole range of media publications, as well as UHRP and myself, titled the Karakash List, a 137-page PDF document specifically focusing on people interned in the county of Karakash in Khotan Prefecture in southern Xinjiang. just going to pause a little bit because I need to show a picture.
Oh. Okay.
Yes. The technology at this event is sponsored by Huawei. And they're having a problem with intercepting the data, and that's why we're being held up. Although I could just email it to them directly, and they wouldn't have to worry about it. So, incorporating two laptops. This one belongs to the Chinese government, and this one is my own. Good. Very briefly outlining the structure of the new leaked document. This is page 1 of 137. You see on the leftmost the number of rows. The document has 667 data rows. Many of them are representing duplicate identities, but different verdicts. And therefore, in total, the document has the identities of nearly 3,000 Uyghur adults and 311 unique primary individuals represented by each data row. You see in the first couple of columns, well, it's hard to see, I guess, but you see the internment camp that they're detained in for re-education. These are all what we can call vocational training internment camps, which are only one of a number of different forms of internment. I'm going to keep track of time, okay, this one has a clock, because otherwise you might miss your flights back home. Okay, the date of the internment, their names, ID numbers, where they're registered, the reasons for internment, and then the widest middle column, that is the biggest visible, has their three circles. Firstly, their family circle over 3 generations. You have parents, you have children, you have relatives, etc. Then you have a social or neighborhood circle, and then you have information about the religious inheritance circle, a very rarely used term. So this document is revealing some fairly internal data that is not commonly found on official government websites. It's even very uncommon in internal government documents. Some of the terminology used in this document is in fact not found anywhere else. So very interesting. And the data in the middle column is really used to assess and evaluate whether these persons should be released or not. The actual text of the verdict of release or non-release is in the rightmost column over there. So this is the basic structure of the document. Overall statistics, we have 656 persons in some form of internment or prison, representing 23.5% of 2,800 individuals. The 2,800, I would say, is not a precise total count, because over 1,000 of these individuals do not have ID numbers. They're only identified by name and age, and some of them would be double counted. But about 27 to 2,800 adults, plus several hundred minors under the age of 18, which we have not counted for the purpose of computing an adult internment share. Of these, 4.9%, or 137, have been sentenced to prison terms. 42 are in detention centers, and the others are in the vocational training internment camps. So these are the basic statistics. You can tell it's very extensive personal information. Quite interesting is the internment over time. This pertains to the 311 primary individuals. Oh yes, I need to. Oh my goodness. computers. I didn't do this. The Chinese, I thought the Chinese, they control this computer and they do it, but they didn't. I don't know. The Chinese are sleeping. Sorry. Okay, so I have to do both computers. I'm very sorry. So these are all the numbers I just explained. There for you again. And this is the chart I'm talking about. So this shows over time, and basically it confirms that the internment campaign really kicked off in April 2017, which is the first of the slightly taller bars. The biggest peak was in May 2017, you see there. There was another peak in September, October 2017, and then far over to the right, another one in the spring of 2018, most notably in May 2018. So, which is quite interesting because in the first half of 2018 is when a lot of these camps were significantly enlarged in size. So very interesting data. Reasons for internment, these were coded by myself because obviously they're all over the place. And one person could have more than one reason for internment listed, so you have multiple counts here. Violation of birth control policies is the #1 reason stated, often though not by itself. This, I think, rarely was a standalone reason for internment, typically cited alongside other reasons. The general category of untrustworthy, 不放心, is the second highest. This is a catch-all category that was much more frequently just mentioned by itself. Almost 70 or 80% of the over 100 instances where this was mentioned as a reason of the internment, no other reason was given. So we're looking at a generic demographic reason for internment as the government is concerned especially about persons under the age of 40. The reason for that is obvious. Acts of violent resistance were mainly committed by these age groups. These age groups are considered more susceptible to influence the younger generation. The third one is religion-related in a wider sense, contain all kinds of religion-related reasons, then linked to anything abroad. This could be either they've communicated with somebody abroad using an illegal communication app, or they are relatives of persons abroad, or they themselves have gone abroad and returned, or in quite a few instances they applied for a passport without ever leaving the country. Formerly detained persons come next. Persons who used to be in detention in the past are perennially suspect. It's like a vicious cycle. Once you are suspect, you're always suspect. Then you get put into the camp because you're suspect. And if you've been in a camp, you're even more suspect than when you were before. And anyone who associates with you is also suspect. And it just goes on and on and on. It's like an endless cycle of suspicion because there's no trust. The system is not based on trust. And so on. Just briefly, religion-related reasons we can break down also by age. You have age categories down there. Sorry. Beijing is still, they're still in the middle of the night. They're not operating this computer. Okay. Age starts 20 to 24 years, 25. These are 5-year age cohorts going from 20 to 65 plus. And it's mainly 45 years and above that over 60% of persons in that age group have some religion-related reason for their original internment stated. And I think one of the reasons for that is a lot of the younger ones are simply in the untrustworthy category. And the untrustworthy category is also largely effectively related to religion, but it's not directly stated. So if you had the same chart for untrustworthy, it's the inversion. You have mostly persons under 40. The main reason, apparently, of this document, even though it's not stated in the title as such, is all of the data in all of the columns points towards the verdict, whether somebody should be released or not. That's the main point of this document in terms of its own internal data. And quite interestingly, this document, interestingly enough, represents the strongest piece of evidence that we have that a lot of the persons in the vocational training camps are being or have been released. which makes sense because these camps are not permanent. In the sense, well, they're permanent structures, but they're not there to intern people long term. That's what prisons are there for. So one batch of the Uyghur population has been sentenced to prison. The other batch is still stuck in other forms of detention or in the justice system training schools, in the transformation through education, the many other extra-legal structures that we have. The vocational training camps are kind of like the bottom rung. If you've done better, they're essentially a route to be released into forced labor, release into unfreedom. And this is what the data bears out, 74% release of all forms, but for 13% a very common verdict is also, well, they should finish their minimum 1 year of re-education. So effectively the release rate is closer to 85 or 90%. Only 12.5% are explicitly said to have to continue studying. Which of course doesn't say anything about the camps being filled with new people. These are existing people. So it's entirely possible also the nightlight data that we have. A lot of camps actually don't have a lot of decrease in light. Also the 4 camps in Caracas don't have a lot of light, don't have a lot of nightlight decrease to measure the activity. So these camps are not closed down. We have the data for persons who were interned mostly in 2017 and 18. What's happening now in these camps, we have very little idea. Are they pushing new people through these camps? Entirely possible. Okay. Trying to now take a step back from the document and trying to see what can it tell us? What is the bigger picture that comes from all this? The document tells us, like no other piece of data, that Xinjiang's internment campaign is very labor intensive, that it's based on detailed investigation, it's based on detailed reasons for internment, although many of them are very generic, but still, there can be very detailed appraisals of individuals. So the state has not simply scooped up hundreds of thousands and millions of people. It has put a lot of work into gathering information on them within its own worldview. This groundwork, this investigative groundwork, has, we can surmise, and by comparison with the categories used by from other secondary documents, been largely on the shoulders of the village-based work teams, the Fanghuiju in Chinese, Fanghuiju Gongzedui, the village-based work teams, which were launched in 2014 by Zhang Chunxian. Chen Quanguo's predecessor. And if we look at the timing of the internment campaign, you see the Chinese New Year period for each year. The original work team campaign ran from 2014 to 16. And then the send-off day, there's like a send-off, a regional send-off ceremony for sending off the work teams into the villages after Chinese New Year, typically. And the full deployment, by when they're supposed to be fully deployed. The full deployment is the rightmost date, typically early March or late February. Now in 2017, Chen Quanguo simply continued what had happened the previous 3 years. Chen Quanguo extended the village work team project indefinitely. Initially it was limited for 3 years, and Chen Quanguo said, this is becoming a long-term mechanism, and it's still ongoing. So, March 1st was the full deployment, March 1st, 2017, the full deployment of the village-based work teams, and we all know that the internment campaign started in late March, early April, and had a peak in the summer. Now that's telling us something, isn't it? So Chen's strategy in Xinjiang, there's some possibility that something significant happened in March 2016 at the 2 sessions in Beijing, because that is the one time that we know for sure that Zhang Chunxian, the party secretary of Xinjiang before Chen Quanguo himself, who's now the party secretary of Xinjiang, I should have explained that earlier, and Xi Jinping, China's president, were all three in the same place. And of course, that's possible that they made some plans back then, because from my analysis, it really looks like Chen Quanguo hit the ground running. He really, really hit the ground running when he came to Xinjiang in August 2016. He lost no time, really no time. He was busy. And his strategy is that between August 2016 and early 2017, those 6-7 months, he firstly securitized. He applied the securitization strategy that he had rolled out in Tibet. Police stations, police surveillance systems. And that was a pre-requirement of the internment campaign, right? You don't want to scoop up a huge amount of the population and risk public resentment without turning the place into a real police state. So this had to come before the internment campaign to make sure that the government had full control and nobody could resist the internment. Secondly, it took some time to wrap up the evaluation of the Village Work Team campaign. Traditionally, the Village Work Team campaign each year had an evaluation time and then a relaunch time with new requirements, and the party secretary would state new requirements. How am I doing for time? Oh dear. Okay, I need to be faster. So anyways, this sort of untimely succession time in August indicates that, in my opinion, that Jiang Chunqian was cut off before his time, and Qin was brought in strategically. The focus then, in a very important January 7th speech, was on the iron discipline for cadres, and then the internment campaign started. So, my argument is that Qin was more an innovator, was an innovator in Tibet, but in Xinjiang he was not as much an innovator, he was a manager. He was charged with upscaling the existing mechanisms, because Xinjiang already had, under Jiang Chunqian, already had mechanisms for identifying re-education targets, such as the village work teams, already had re-education procedures, and already had a system of dedicated institutions. So all that Qin needed to do was to bring in the policing and police state experience and upscale the re-education system dramatically. And that required managerial skills, especially iron discipline among the cadres. So very new interesting arguments can be made from, this is all based on research of the Karakash list, the new document. So to conclude, the future strategy of Beijing and Xinjiang is based on ongoing social control and the ongoing evaluation. The document notes that a lot of the verdicts in the document says people can continue to be in release or continue to be employed as opposed to having to return. In the first year of having been released from a vocational internment camp, people are supposed to be closely followed by the authorities and evaluated on a regular basis. That's what also the China cable said before in November. And you see exactly that in a Karakash document. You see, is allowed, people are said to be allowed to, permitted to continue to be released, right? Everybody in Xinjiang is on probation. So I think this will continue. I'm not sure that they will stop this after 1 year. Everybody in Xinjiang is on probation and could be re-interned or newly interned in a camp. Controlling people on location through work teams, police surveillance. So the next really mechanism of control, as at least some of the camps are emptying out, not all of the camps are emptying out. One type of camp for sure is getting more empty. People are being controlled where they live. Yeah, they're almost being interned where they live. Mandatory labor is part of that, and highly controlled by environments. This is also where new urban settlements come in. This is one example in Karakash. This big blue-roofed area was built in the middle of 2018. It had fences around, high fences around every single building. That was removed later on. And further up in the top of the picture, you see new urban settlements. So I think this is probably, this is a part of the future of Beijing's rule over the Uyghurs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adrian. Tremendous. We will next hear from Abdulwali Ayub. He's a Uyghur linguist who's come to Washington from Norway, where he has found political asylum. He's currently a fellow with the International Cities of Refuge Network. He's not a stranger to the U.S., however. He got his master's degree here at the University of Kansas in 2011. This is his first visit back in over 8 years. After he got his master's degree, he returned to China with a wish to preserve the Uyghur language and work with his people. He promoted social and cultural rights through the promotion of Uyghur language education. Imprisoned himself, a former political prisoner, in 2013 to 2014, probably a very good example of the pre-existing mechanisms of arbitrary detention and re-education systems that Adrian was just discussing. UHRP has published an in-depth report on the entire movement for Uyghur mother tongue education and Abdul Wahab's role in that, and he has been very involved in the analysis of this document, so please welcome him to the podium.
Okay, let me start. Thank you for coming, everyone. And I'm going to talk about something different because Adrian, Mr. Adrian already talked very well about the document. And we received the document in 2019, June 23rd. And it's the second document we received. The first is June 20th. After 3 days, we received another one. And but the one who received the document in Netherlands, he not very likely to share, and we have to wait for a long time. And almost the first one we have to wait a month. Second one we have to wait 3 months. And then we have chance to send the document to Adrian Zenz, and we cooperated very well. Asya Oblahat and Adrian Zenz and another anonymous friend in Netherlands. And after we received it, we cooperated very well with different media, and a chance to talk. This is Karakash in Oten prefecture in East Turkestan, and this is the satellite image. In 2007, after we received the document, we need to verify it, and I translated some part of it into Uyghur, and I asked my friends in Turkey to find out the people mentioned in the document. And we found 9 people, 8 is in Turkey, and 1 is in another country. And they told about their parents, and they don't know anything about them, but they know some of them are arrested. And one lady, after she heard that her father passed away, she doesn't know anything. But depending on the document, she heard that it's her father passed away. And another that the lady I talked to, Rehengül, and she said that she doesn't know anything, and I just told her about the dependent document, and her grandfather, Mentimin Qari, sentenced 6 years when he was 80 years old. And another lady I contacted with, and her grandpa sentenced 12 years, he was 80 years old. And I keep asking, and I contacted with 29 Uyghur who knows about the people mentioned in the document, and the 9 Uyghur who mentioned in the document, and they helped me to verify the document. For example, that like after I translated the document, nobody knows the places because they changed it. After 2017, the local government changed the place names. They changed the place name. For example, that this is Karakash. They before we have township, but in 2017 they changed. They divide Karakash for 5 districts. And in this document, it mentioned it's Chinese. And when I talk to the people that, are you from the number 1 district? Are you from number 2 district? He said, what are you talking about? What's this? And I need to ask people that this, like the number 1 district is this, number 2 district is this, and it's like on satellite image. I showed them and they said, oh, we don't call this. We call it with the original name. This is the big challenge for us. And after that, I found the original names and matched with the document. And yeah, in that document mentioned 5 de-education camp. Number 1, it's this one, and number 2, and number 2 and number 3. And this number 1 is very interesting that it's in Bostankul Industrial District. After this, I asked different people from Kashgar, from Korla. They told me the same fact, that those re-education camps are in industrial zone. And why it's in industrial zone? It's because, I think it's because of they want to transform those people to forced labor. That's why they deliberately arrange those re-education camp in industrial zone. It's another fact that number two re-education camp are it's very close to a train station. And why it's very close to train station? Because they want to make it as a factory. It's easy to transport. And I asked, I interviewed another 3 Uyghur from Kashgar. They told me that the one of the internment camp in Kashgar is in Kashgar train station. It's the same with the education camp in Kashgar, in Karakash. This is the age. Adrian already talked about it. This is also the age. And let me talk about this. This is number. Yes, this is number 1, the re-education camp. It's the satellite image. It's very interesting that, number 1 re-education camp. This is the one. The another one is detention center. Depend on the list, we can find that people, they always send people from detention center to re-education camp, from re-education camp to detention center. That's why they built the same place. It's easy to move people. Because in the re-education camp, there are prosecution and court and the police office. They interrogate at the same place, and then prosecution work on them, and then send them to the prison. It's very close, from re-education camp to detention center. And another fact that number 3 detention center, depend on the document, we can tell that number 3 detention center also the prison. 3 detainees mentioned in the document that they are fushing. They are having their prison life in that detention center, number 3 detention center. It means that number 3 detention center at the same time re-education camp and the prison. This is satellite image of the centers. One thing I need to make clear that number state detention center, I think. Yeah, yes. In 2008, until 2008 March, the number 3 detention center is here. And in 2008, about March, they moved the detention center is here. I asked this, the people from Karkash. One of them visited the Karkash a few weeks ago, and one of them visited in Karkash in 2018. At that time, March, and his father-in-law detained the number 3 eradication camp. And he told me that they moved it. Originally it's here, and in 2018, they changed it to this place, number A, from B to A. And there is duplication. Adrian already wrote in his reports, but he didn't have time to talk about it. About duplication, we have a lot of duplication. It's originally 667 the detainees, but the real number is 314. And why we have this duplication? I think it's because of like in China, it's very popular thing that lower level government always cheat the upper level government. There's several amount of people you have to arrest, but there's not enough people. What can we do it? Duplicate the number. And then they can report that, oh, we arrested 600, but at the end, no. And another thing that in this document, another like fraudulent that more than 10 detainees, the former detainees, after they release it, they found a job in gold industry, goldsmiths. But it's interesting. In after this mass arresting in Karkash, people I can show you the pictures, and the street is empty, and nobody get married. Depending on Uyghur culture, we buy gold for wedding. Nobody get wedding. Who can buy those golds? Who can find a job those goldsmiths industry? It's impossible. They're just cheating the upper level government that we educated them, and they already found a job in gold education, like goldsmith, something like that. And another thing that one example is very interesting that one Uyghur, Habibullah, he has clinic in Karkash before the arrestment. After the arrestment, the document said that he found a job in Hogodian. It's hot
pot soups.
Hot pot, yeah. How could that be possible? Like a clinic, the doctor, medical doctor, and at the end, after education, he found a job in the restaurant. Another thing, it's interesting that another lady who educated the re-education camp, and after that, after he released, he found a job at the same place. And I can show you the picture that that place. It's very small, and it doesn't need 2 Uyghur to run this. So the document tells us that this duplication is because of the lower level government needs to report their something, and then they create something very illogical. And do I have time? Yeah. I want to explain something. For example, that depend on Adrian's article, that the first reason is family planning. I interviewed the people about this topic, why this family planning is the main reason of the people who being arrested. In 2016, about November, yes, and the local Shuji, local secretary, party secretary of Hoten, he gave a speech to officials in Hoten. He told that why we have so many people don't follow the family planning. it's not only don't follow the family planning, it's the kind of resistance. It's the kind of peaceful resistance, like voiceless resistance. It's symbol of you are not following the Chinese law. We are not Chinese anymore, so we are not going to follow your law. That's why they think that it's a very serious problem. For example, that this family planning is implementing in China, but like it's in China, it's everywhere. Nobody strictly follow the family planning. But if Uyghur, they don't follow the family planning, it becomes something resistance. That's why they depend on my interview from people from Hotan and people from Kashgar. Like I interviewed 5, and they told me that especially the guy who came from Hotan in 2017 May, he told me that he participated the conference, and that leader told that this is not only a family planning issue, this is a political issue. They are not following the Chinese law. It means that they don't admit themselves as Chinese. So they're breaking our law deliberately. This is the first one. Second, untrustworthy issue. After in this document, always repeated that people born after 1980s and 1990s and 2000, it's untrustworthy. Why are they untrustworthy? We received the document in 2018 about May, and it's a voice document. It tells that our Yalkun Rozi, he arrested because of he compiled the textbook of Uyghur in Uyghur language for Uyghur kids, Uyghur children, Uyghur students, and in that voice conference tells us that after 1980s and 1990s and 2000, and those Uyghur textbooks used more than 3 million Uyghurs reached those Uyghur textbooks. And those 3 million Uyghurs are not trustworthy because of they use the textbook, the old textbook, and it's emphasized Uyghurness, Uyghur identity. So that's why they are untrustworthy, because they use those textbooks compiled by Yalkun Rozi and other Uyghur intellectuals. And its location. Fan Huiju. Adrian just talked about the Fan Huiju. It's started with in 2013. I visited Fan Huiju. I visited in Yelusa County. I visited 7 times, and those folks is to understand the local people's religious and ethnic identity. One by one, those cadre visited the people one by one, asked how many times you pray, how many times you make dua after eating, and how many books do you have about Uyghur history, how many books about about religion, and have you visited religious websites, something like that. I forgot another thing. This document showed that the term Duantonglian. What is Duantonglian? In 2016, September 13th, Chen Zhuangguo, he had a conference. He ordered to stop the phone numbers who connected with outside. And then when your cell phone stopped, you have to go to the telephone company, and telephone company asks you that you have to go to police first, and then we can restore your cell phone. And you go to police, and the police will arrest you. Because of this is Duantonglian. It is started 2016 September 13. It's Duantonglian means this. At that time, some of them arrested, some of them not. But in 2017, just earlier mentioned, it's in May, it's another peak. That's why, because at that time, the people did not arrest it in 2016, September, they arrested in 2017. Another thing that the app, this document also mentioned Kuya, this app, and depend on the first document released in 2019 November 24th. It tells that more than 187,000 Uyghur downloaded that app, and those Uyghur are under this under the list of untrustworthy, because they downloaded the Kuya app and they tried to connect it outside. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ali. And it's now my pleasure to introduce my colleague at the Uyghur Human Rights Project, Dr. Elise Anderson. We joke that she's Dr. Anderson because of her 2 PhDs, dual PhDs in Central Eurasian Studies and Ethnomusicology from Indiana University, Bloomington. She based her doctoral research on years of on-the-ground research in the Uyghur region. She has focused on the relationship between art and politics, specifically Uyghur music. She speaks Uyghur fluently. I think she may have a few things to say about language in the document, as well as speaking Chinese, and is a practicing musician and dancer. She has worked on the Hill here as the Liu Xiaobo Fellow last summer with the CECC, the Congressional Executive Commission on China, and I'm happy to welcome her to the podium.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and thank all of you who are here today. I'm going to try to keep my remarks even shorter and snappier than I had planned them, because I'm sure a lot of you are wanting to ask questions. Okay, so let me jump in here. So as you know, we at the UHRP, I was a part of a research team that was fortunate enough, thanks to Abdulveli and the chain of transmission that brought this document to us, we were fortunate enough to have a little bit of time to look over it, look through it, and produce a report on it. I hope some of you have been able to grab that report. You can take it with you when you leave today. I prepared a lot more than I'm going to have time to go over and talk about with you, but fortunately some of it repeats things you've already heard today, and also you might be able to leave here with that report so that you can read it yourselves. So I'll just jump in and kind of go quickly but as thoroughly as possible through my slides here. So we at the UHRP, rather than Qaraqash list, labeled this particular document the Qaraqash document, but we're referring to the same thing as my colleague Adrian, as the media has been. And what we tried to get out in our report is what the implications, some of the implications of this document are. And one simple way, a very effective way to put it, is that the Qaraqash document gives us 137 pages of documentary proof that people in East Turkestan are detained or deemed suspicious for legitimate and reasonable actions. And what does that mean? That means that this document helps to verify claims that members of the Uyghur diaspora, that internment camp survivors, and that journalists, reporters, and other researchers have been telling the world about for years. So let's not sort of lose sight of that, right, as we jump into, I don't know, numbers and terminology and all of the details that come out of this document. There's something really fundamental that we can take. So I'll skip over this because you already learned a little bit about what this document looks like and what the cells and rows contain. There's a little bit of an English translation of 12 rows of this now floating around out there that you can peruse if you so choose. We've also included it as an appendix in our report if you're interested in looking at that. So I had planned to talk a little bit about some of the internees. I will stop here just to say, again, not losing sight of some fundamental and basic things. We're talking about a place. We're talking about a very particular place, the Bostan subdistrict of Qaraqash County in Khotan Prefecture in East Turkestan, the Uyghur region. This is a place populated by real people, right? With lives, families, hopes, dreams. And so I just wanted to pay a little bit of homage to that by reminding us kind of where we're looking. So here's this one crude map, right? You can see East Turkestan in orange, the Khotan prefecture in red there. Then here, next, we have a Google Earth image of what Qaraqosh County looks like. So I know you probably can't see it well from afar, but in the middle, where you can see that there is some text in white, that's showing you the location of Qaraqosh County, next to Khotan City. And this is, I hope, a striking image you will take with you. This is iconic for the Uyghur region. These green oases surrounded by this lovely sea, right, of sand in the desert. This is Qaraqosh, right? This is part of the place. In our document, in our report, you can find a little bit of information where we break down things like who are the internees by sex, right? Who are the internees based on what centers they're being sent to. We also, again, to give us a sense of place, and think about how these centers, we've included photos of all of these centers, think about how much they contrast to that lovely green oasis, right, that you saw sort of spreading out before you on our Google Earth image. Here's that possible location of the internment center number 2 near the train station, center number 3, center number 4. Right? Imagine what it's like to be a person living in this place where centers like this. These are just 4 in Qaraqosh County. There are undoubtedly more. And think about, I don't know, how invasive that has been for life as those have sprung up. Similar to my colleagues, my esteemed colleagues here, Adrian and Abdul Ali, we at the UHRP also spent time looking at and trying to kind of categorize and get numbers for different reasons for internment. So you will find tables and charts in our report. You can also, in Appendix 3, see a more extensive list of reasons for internment. So in the body of the report itself, we kind of try to group and scale down, whereas in the appendix, we've given you a more complete range of those things, so it might have research or other value for some of you. And just a few things to highlight. I'll not spend a lot of time talking about this, but one, as you've already heard from both of my colleagues, we also were surprised in a sense to see, family planning or birth control policy violations as one of the main reasons for internment. And we don't know exactly why that is. There's not a lot that we can beyond a shadow of a doubt, sort of give as the reason for why that is. But I would just want us all to think about the fact that, we know that people all over China have violated the family planning policy at one point or another over the years. Where or whenever in China before right now in the Uyghur region, for Uyghurs, probably Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, and others, where have people been put into extrajudicial and extra-legal internment camps for violating family planning policy? Right? Let's keep that in mind. That is something I think that is fundamentally new and fundamentally abhorrent here, and important for us to keep in mind. I think another thing that's important for us all to take away from the reasons for internment is that there are a lot of inconsistencies in some way, internally in this document even, that can make you realize that Uyghurs are damned if they do and damned if they don't. The people who are anyone, whether Uyghur or of another ethnic background, being swept up into this internment campaign is damned if they do and damned if they don't. Some places in the document say, so-and-so had a passport and went abroad, and maybe was in one of the 26 forbidden countries or something else, and that's the reason for their internment. Meanwhile, somebody else had a passport but never went abroad, and that made them suspicious, right? That tells you there's nothing that these large swaths of society, there's nothing that a lot of people in Uyghur society and Qaraqosh society can do not to be suspicious. And I think that's a really important takeaway for all of us to keep in mind. So another section of our report looks at the extent to which details in this document help to corroborate other policies and other practices, state practices that we know about. So I won't spend a lot of time here, but we have referenced excellent reporting by the likes of Human Rights Watch on the Integrated Joint Operations Platform, or IJOP, the app for data gathering, this Becoming Family program, an excellent article by Dr. Darren Beiler that we referenced there. And there are references to two-faced officials, right, that also appear in this document that help to confirm the veracity of details, right, that we know about this and the vast array of reasons the state has found for detaining, interning, or locking people away in prison. And I'll say here, we also have in one section of our report this table where we list the final assessments of sort of bureaucrats, right, the low-level government officials who have compiled this document and compiled all of this information. This shows variety. I think Adrian put it well by saying that people, I tried to write it down, people get released from internment, but released into unfreedom, right? And if we look at the things that are listed in this table, these assessments or judgments, we can see some of that coming out. So you see a lot of people are released into community management and control. That doesn't sound very free to me, right? There are also references to working at the park. That's how we chose to translate this. Likely the forced labor system that Adrian has done so much to sort of reveal and help us to know about and understand. A lot of people are told they have to continue training and so forth, right? So you can read that in more detail in the report, but just, again, Adrian put it in a very evocative way. Internees get released into unfreedom. They can end up back in internment at any moment as well. And I'll end by noting that we just had a couple of points for further research that we thought were really interesting and wanted to bring up. Adrian made the point in his presentation that there is some novel terminology in the Qaraqash document, or the Qaraqash list, and one of those includes what we think is probably a method, the name for a method of data gathering and analysis that remarkably returns absolutely no results anywhere online, right? Which shows us it's something internal, and it's called the 3 circles and 6 diagrams collision analysis, or 三权六图碰撞分歧. Sorry, yeah. So, right, you can see examples in the original Chinese. You can also see them in this little bit of English translation, right, of this appearing in the way that officials talk about how they've been assessing people's family circles and the things that all of the information they've gathered. We don't know exactly what it means, especially what the 6 diagrams are referring to. This is something that warrants further research. And I was glad to hear Abdulali mention this. Kind of administrative restructuring of Qaraqash is something we found as well in our research and thought was very interesting, that in May of 2017, I believe it was, and this is from a government website, and it's telling us that the government was setting up new management committees for different sub-districts and different administrative units. And we can't say a lot about what this means exactly, but we think it's likely not coincidental that the government, the authorities, were changing the administrative structure of the region at the same time that the camp program was really starting to take off and expand in earnest. And that hints at the sort of way that the authorities likely have conceived of this campaign as one that encompasses the totality, right, of administration, social life, the organization of the world in the Uyghur region. So I will wrap up my comments there. I thank you for your attention, and I look forward to hearing your comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elise. We now do have time for comments and questions. we will be asking our panelists if they'd like to respond to each other, but meanwhile, please think of your questions, and we'll be able to call upon you in a minute. So feel free to raise your hand when you're ready, and I'll be noting down who to call upon. So let me turn to Adrian and Abdulwali and Elise to see if there's any response to each other's comments.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to take the opportunity to briefly make some further remarks on the question of also the number of camps in Karakash. Obviously, 4 camps are mentioned for the primary detainees. Further camps are in fact mentioned in the document, one particular township camp. But an even more interesting bit is this document contains remarkable detail that we have not even touched yet. One of them are the multiple ways in which different camps can be named. And this has 2 implications. One implication is that a person can be identified in the camp not just by which camp he or she is in, but also by the building number. Camps have building numbers. The larger camps at least have district numbers. They can have different districts, buildings, and class. They're also in class. For example, one person is to be shown in district in re-education camp number 1, district 12, building 6, class 18. So it's like you could almost write them a letter to that thing, although who knows. Okay, the other implication is Karakash at one point, I believe 2016 or something, I have it somewhere, had 12 districts, the whole county. And we have heard that the districts were changed and reorganized and many new ones were added. But re-education camps, or the vocational internment camps, are also called number 1 district camp, meaning that's the camp for district number 1. And the document has a number 12 district training center, which indicates that likely there's at least 1 vocational internment camp for each district in the county. And of course we have prior information that shows that each administrative unit, township level and higher, likely has a camp, at least has a vocational training internment camp. Oftentimes they also have other forms of camps, right? Because that's only one type of re-education camp. So these are some of the insights the document can give us about the camp situation and structure, and just we realize how little we know about all this. Thank you.
I forgot to talk. Actually, there are mentioned Yuhuchi, another one. We have like 5 detainees in Yuhuchi. It's medical area, and I interviewed the people. What this medical area? They told me that in every county we have a hospital, and in every hospital there is a special place for camp detainees. If you are sick, you cannot stay in a normal hospital. You have to stay in the camp there. Still, in 2017, one of Uyghur scholars died in a Kashgar Keramba hospital, and I asked where he died. He died because of in Keramba hospital there is a special place for camp detainees. It means that in this document showed Yuhuchi. It means that it's also the re-education camp, but it's in hospital. And another we in that document showed 18th village re-education camp. I asked the people, where is it? It's actually in a party school of Karakash, and then I asked the people from different places. They told me that, for example, that the one from my hometown, like Kashgar Khoncher, it's Shufushen, and they told me that there's a re-education camp in party school of my hometown, and in the Kharkash also there's a re-education camp in party school. I think if we study this more, and we will find that every party school in our homeland change it to re-education camp. Yeah, thank you.
Great, we'll be ready to go to questions. So we have a question back here, Max. The mic will come if you can give your name and affiliation. Thank you.
Hi, Max Gelber, George Washington University. I haven't read the report or the document, but I see here that among the reasons, the birth policy violation is numbered 113. But then when you go back to the demographic information, there's only 9% women are interned based on the 311. So who's getting interned for violating birth policies? Who's not? And are some people going to different areas of detention or being assigned to a non-detention detention center? Are they down to house arrest? If you could explain those numbers.
It's a good question. From this 314 detainees, I think more than, I think 5 or 4 are female. Most of them are male.
311.
Yeah. And yeah, about 311, yes. Yeah. And from that document, I can tell that all of them are in the same place. Those 4 female detainees are in number 2 detention center, number 2 re-education camp. I think number 2 re-education camp is mostly female. Most women are inside there, but this I think we need to study more. I think the female is concentrated in different place, not in that the document showed 4 detention center, 4 re-education camp. Maybe they are in different re-education camp. So this document didn't mention that because of they are not in this 4 re-education camp. Maybe they are somewhere else. Thank you.
From the internees, yes, hi, Max, thank you for your question. Excuse me, let me restart. So of the 311 detainees that we counted, we found, yes, 114, I believe, who were interned for birth control policy or family planning policy violations, vast majority of them men. And in many cases, their wives would be listed in the family circle and often not punished, not interned or taken away for the same violation or the same reason. So there's not always a whole lot more that we can say about that, but don't forget at the same time that people on the outside, and especially women, since it's mostly men who are interned, are still subject to very insidious forms of political, ideological re-education. They might be on the outside, but there's a lot going on the outside as well that they're still subject to.
Very much agreeing with this. About 90 and 91% of those shown as interned in the document are men and are being targeted, and the men are taken also, they're being held responsible. So if, for example, a wife wore a veil, the assumption is that it's the husband's responsibility. Yeah. And the same for birth control. So it's very much targeting men and husbands and household heads, obviously, who traditionally are in charge in Muslim cultures, also Uyghur culture, but also very much the target because they are obviously juicier targets for the state, being social influencers, and obviously many acts of resistance are being perpetrated by males. Did I leave something out of your question?
No, just a quick follow-up comment question would be that there could be companion documentation or something that the document did not capture that could tell us more about the women and their family circles and how they weren't accounted for in these kind of documents.
Well, a lot of secondary documents that I have not published in November indicates that the internment campaign has left a lot of households with single mothers. With it says no labor force in the household reason for poverty. So, all the other evidence that we have clearly indicates that males who are targeted for internment and are literally missing at home.
Excellent work, thank you.
We have a question here.
Hi, Shelley Hahn with the Fair Labor Association. We've been using very similar terms like a training center, detention center, internment camp. In this case, what are we talking about? Is there a difference in the center, the Zhongshin? Are they the same things? And what does it mean for the prospect of potential forced labor in any of those centers?
Yes, thank you. So the re-education facilities mentioned in the document are almost entirely labeled centers or education and training centers, which is short for vocational training internment centers or camps. Who, by definition, will lead into labor, i.e. forced labor. Very few other facilities are mentioned, and the likelihood of that is because this is about a verdict for release for the next stage. And a lot of, if you read my report, a lot of the release verdicts specifically mention labor, and many specifically mention industrial park. You also saw that on a slide by Elise Henderson. And those are the camps from which people are being released outside the internment system. And so those are the ones to look out for in connection with forced labor. And so the document, to answer, I guess, your question from a big picture perspective, has very, very interesting implications for forced labor. And we could do follow-up studies, actually, on it.
Great. I'll jump in here before taking more questions. For those who'd like to go ahead and read Adrian's own paper and haven't found it yet, you just need to Google Adrian Zen's Journal of Political Risk. And would you like to give us the exact title of this analysis?
Yeah, the Caracas list is in the title, so yeah. It's about dissecting the anatomy of Beijing's internment campaign. But
if you just Google Adrian Zen's Caracas list, you'll get a lot of media coverage. If you want to look at his own published analysis, be sure to look for the Journal of Political Risk. As we said, UHRP's report is on our website, uhrp.org. And it looks like we have 2 or 3 more questions. We'll take them together and then see how much time we have for answers. So right here, we had a comment, a question?
Sure. Hi, my name is Paul Johnson. I'm just following the issue. I'm independent. Forgive me if this was spoken about before, but just the question of facial recognition technology. I wonder if there has been some discussion about the deployment and the use and the implication of facial recognition technology.
Great. And do we have another hand here? Yes. Go ahead, Ajna.
I actually have 2 questions. One is about the coronavirus, specifically for Dr. Zenz and Mr. Ayub. Are you concerned about the spread of the virus in the camps and what those implications might be? And then the second is sort of more policy-oriented questions. Ms. Anderson sort of gave us like what we should take away from all this data. What do you think policymakers, especially the U.S. government, should take away from this in terms of its foreign policy with China?
Thank you very much. And we will take one more question here in the middle.
Hi, I was wondering if you could speak about the impact that this has on children. I think you had mentioned that a lot of homes are now run by single mothers. So if you could just speak about the impact of children as they may age into the arrests made of people that are being sent into these camps. If you could just talk about how these children are educated. I think you had mentioned that the Uyghur language is no longer being taught. So if you could speak about that.
Great. Why don't we take them in reverse order? And Abdullah, do you want to talk about children and their experience growing up in East Turkestan today? It's very painful, I know. Father of children himself. Go ahead.
Let me tell you something is very heartbreaking. In that document, they mentioned that 4 kids in Wuhan right now without the parents. 3 kids. Mother arrested, and there's no mention where is the father, but 3 kids in Wuhan, and one is 5, another is 9, another is 14 years old. This document mentioned the 3 kids in Wuhan, but didn't mention what are they doing. Just written Navy. It means that in inland China, it means that they mentioned that they are in Wuhan. And I concern coronavirus. I concern their 3 kids' life. What are they doing? Who taking care of them? And about this, like education, that part in Hotan is the first place restricted Uyghur completely. It's in 2016 June. And then in 2017 September, so-called Xinjiang administration restricted Uyghur. Hotan is the first place restricted Uyghur. So those kids, where are they? They are in, depend on my interview, in people in the Uyghur diaspora in Turkey. They are in kids center. The name is very beautiful. Yuan, love kindergarten, and those kids without parents, they are living in love kindergarten. And but depend on the TikTok video we have watched, they are not in love. They are crying, actually, without the parents. Thank you.
Great, and then we have a question on coronavirus and thoughts about that given the camp system.
Yes, obviously the virus situation is of great concern. In regards to Xinjiang, of course, we have a limited number of official cases, no idea about the real situation. In regards to the camps, I think we should be a little bit, I think for Uyghurs this must be an extremely emotional and crazy topic. From a sort of slightly rational perspective, one would say that Xinjiang is not as badly affected as areas closer to Wuhan or Hubei. The camps tend to be somewhat more isolated places. They are not typically in city centers, and there's typically not a lot of coming and going in terms of bringing people visiting or bringing the virus in. Or there is visiting, but it's restricted. But of course, these are so-called sitting ducks. These are highly concentrated, very unhygienic regions and areas. Given how that the coronavirus is much more easily transmissible than what was originally thought, I think it's impossible to make any prediction about it. But before we have any more evidence, I'm not sure that we should quickly move into doomsday scenarios either. So, but that's just a very unemotional response to a very, very loaded and difficult topic. So I think we just have very little information on the situation.
And the last 2 questions were about facial recognition. How does that integrate with, or how is that touched on by, what does the document tell us about that? And then also U.S. government foreign policy implications. Who would like to take those?
Yeah, I've not seen any direct evidence of the document talking about facial recognition.
Yeah, in that document, it mentioned that it means that integrated joint operation system. It's Yitihua, it means that you have your pictures and you have every information about you. And Yitihua Tusung, it means that the integrated that system suggested that this one is dangerous. Why? How can they describe? How can they decide you are dangerous or not? You have picture in that system, and if you go the street very quickly, or your faces are not very normal, very angry or something, and those camera catch your picture and send to the center. And the center decided you are dangerous and send message to police and you will be arrested. That's related. The it means that the system have your picture, the normal picture, but if your picture is not normal in that system, it means that you are in danger. And we have the guy who worked for this integrated system, and he participated, developed the system. He's somewhere in the world, in the outside, and he can prove this. I have seen the picture in his hand, and he participated that like someone is normal if you like this, but if you are angry, it means that depending on the system, you are like 3 category, the blue one, and yellow one, and red one. Like my face is blue one. If I'm nervous, it's become red. And if you are nervous in front of the camera, like a surveillance camera, that system will remind the police that this one is danger. Then the police will call you and arrest you. That's related to the face recognition system. Yeah.
And Elise, would you like to give a quick line on UHRP's call to action to the United States government?
Sure, I will try. If I can also add just one quick comment to that. I think one thing to keep in mind about the facial recognition technology, AI, the apps, in some senses there's very sophisticated policing and very sophisticated data gathering going on, but this document, in which I, like Adrian, did not find anything directly, and our research team did not find anything directly related to the facial recognition technologies. We can see the sophistication in some senses, but we can also see that it's a very crude system. And it's a crude system because it relies on a tremendous amount of human power that is easily going to lead to errors and things like that. So if maybe that's a helpful takeaway, I thought I would add it in. U.S. government, it's an excellent question. Thank you, Junor, for the question. What the U.S. government should take away, I mean, I would reiterate on one level, I think keeping in mind the personal level is really important. These are just 311 primary individuals, right, with thousands more mentioned who are clearly being surveilled and monitored, and I think that should help us to understand, and lawmakers and policymakers considering this issue, to keep in mind the scope and the scale of what is happening and the fact that lives are at stake, but also certain values are at stake of, freedom, democracy, human rights, and fundamental human dignity. And that the United States government needs to do whatever it can. We need to do whatever we can to uphold those values of human rights and human dignity, and not sacrificing them to certain political, trade, other economic concerns, right? And so one way toward that is through the passage of the Uyghur Act. Of course, as we all know, S-178, talk to your senators, right? It's back in the Senate now. Talk to your senators, encourage anyone who might be on the fence. Talk to the Senate, is it Committee on Foreign Relations, write letters, pick up the phone and call. But yes, human lives, human dignity, and fundamental values are at stake, and we must act.
Thank you. I'd also like to welcome all of our audience to attend an upcoming policy forum, also co-sponsored by our 2 organizations, the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, the Uyghur Human Rights Project, as well as the International Committee to End Transplant Abuse in China. In this very room on March 10th, we'll be presenting groundbreaking research-based presentation on organ procurement issues in China and extrajudicial killing, confronting the evidence is the title of the report, and you'll see that out there. Please speak with Christina or any of us if you'd like to be on the invitation list. And I want to thank everyone for being here. I hope you'll also join me in thanking our panelists for speaking today.